What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 3 on my journey towards mechanics mastery. In this video, we'll again be going over my corkscrew with all brand new cues and finally getting into some hip movement and rotation, which is really exciting. With this episode and last episode, you'll have well over 80% of the knowledge to execute the corkscrew like a pro. And finally, we'll end it off with the reverse 10 and 2 cue that I teased from last episode. Let's not waste any time and go straight into the corkscrew breakthrough that I had. The breakthrough was this. Get wide, try to move. It sounds really simple, but it made a world of a difference. And of course, we'll get into the why later. Here we have one of my first attempts versus last episode. Although it's not perfect, you could definitely tell it looks more fluid and it's with a puck, so a little more challenging. Before we get into the why, we first need to look at how the hips move in the corkscrew. For this, we're going to look at arguably the #1 prospect in the world, Connor Bedard. Here he's executing the corkscrew in the warm-up. Let's try to pay close attention to how his hips are moving, specifically his hip headlights. Imagine the hip headlights as two imaginary beams shooting out from the bony part of your hip. How we measure or see hip rotation is by following where those imaginary headlights are pointing. We'll get back to Bedard in a second, but first, as always, let's take a look at the most obvious example, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. For this, we're gonna have to move away from the corkscrew for just a second and take a look at Connor McDavid's forward stride. Yes, the forward stride is a rotational movement. I'm going to play it out and try to pay attention to how his hip headlights are moving. Notice how they're constantly going from facing us to facing away, turning back and forth and back and forth. What we also see is the striding leg turning or snapping in, which is another sign of hip rotation. At full speed, especially near the end, it's very noticeable that his hips are rotating back and forth. Let's go back to Bedard's corkscrew and we see the same thing, especially at the beginning. His hips go from facing one way to the other way. He's just making these tiny rotations and it looks more like a swivel of the hips versus that massive rotation that we saw with McDavid. We could also look at his feet since the hips, knee, and foot will be rotating as one. So his toes are pointed in the direction his hips are facing and they turn back and forth as well. We also see he's cutting with the heel of the skate, like I mentioned in the last episode. The last thing I want to highlight with Bedard's corkscrew here is the difference between these reps at the beginning and the end. At the end, he's just in your standard wide tripod position with both feet parallel, his hips square, and gliding. This is what a lot of us do, and of course there's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of situations that call for just getting wide. That being said, I think it's valuable to see the difference between the corkscrew, which is a movement, and just a standard wide tripod stance. Let's now take a look at this concept in my corkscrew. I do a pretty good job rotating my hips if I do say so myself. We can see my hip headlights going back and forth. I do lose a bit of rotation at the end, but that's okay and pretty normal. We could also look at my feet and we see the same thing as well. One thing I noticed was that I actually found myself naturally wanting to counter rotate my upper body and lower body, which made the movement feel a lot easier and more natural. On this rep, you can see my arms are the first thing to rotate, almost like I'm loading up the rotation with my upper body. We'll be going into a little more detail on upper body rotation a little later on, so keep watching. In general, I'm feeling more rotational, I'm feeling smoother, and I'm also feeling the posterior oblique sling activate, or at Training 2.0 we call it the inner spring. But sadly, we won't be covering that in this video. Some noticeable areas of improvement is that I'm pushing out too much or abducting the hips, and I'm also a little more biased towards external hip rotation, whereas all the best corkscrewers in the world are more biased towards adducting and internal hip rotation, like we see with Laine on his most recent highlight reel goal. And even someone like McDavid, who is more naturally bow-legged, is more biased towards internal hip rotation and adducting when corkscrewing. So why did this cue get wide and try to move work? Well, the only way to generate speed or move when wide is through rotation, especially at the start. You're gonna need and get the most rotation when you're initially accelerating. So that's where the glide comes in. By actively slowing down and gliding, I have to re-accelerate, thus forcing me to twist the hips again and again, building up that feeling and movement pattern, so that eventually I'll be able to maintain the same level of rotation throughout the entire movement, and then eventually eliminate the need to glide or stop. That's why this McDavid clip is amazing to look at hip rotation. Because of the nature of the drill, he is constantly having to re-accelerate, meaning more and more rotation. And of course, to get the most hip rotation in your corkscrew, you're going to need all the cues that I discussed in last episode to be on point as well, especially getting heel pressure and staggering your feet. One of my problems that I think a lot of people could relate to is that my hips are tight. It's not very comfortable to just chill in this very wide position, especially when I start rotating, it puts a lot of strain on my groin. When doing the corkscrew, you want your hips to be super relaxed and swiveling back and forth. That's what gives you that flowy and smooth look. But if your hips are tight or you have any physical constraints, then naturally your body will brace itself and lock up as a protective mechanism. If I'm ever going to reach mastery, I need my body to be in optimal condition. That said, even if your body is not in pristine shape, don't let that stop you from starting your mechanics journey. You can make a ridiculous amount of progress even if your body is not in perfect shape. That leads right to my next cue, and this cue is given to me by Coach Frank at Train 2.0, and the goal is to get the hips to loosen up, relax, and rotate freely. He called it a hard reset of the hips. It does this by taking advantage of arm swing, angular momentum, and block rotation. Block rotation is when the upper body and hips rotate as one piece. The opposite of block rotation is counter rotation, which is where the upper body and lower body rotate in opposition. A good sign of counter rotation is these little ripples in your shirt or jersey. That's one of the reasons why McDavid has such a prominent side-to-side arm swing, because as we already established, he has a lot of hip rotation, so naturally his upper body and arms want to counter that rotation by moving side to side. And we see both types of rotation at the NHL level, like Matthews here, who's using more of a counter rotation, very similar arm swing to what we saw with my video. We also have Mackinnon using more of a block rotation arm swing, with his hips and chest moving in the same direction. Needless to say, there's use cases for both types of rotation in hockey. Like I mentioned, the forward stride requires more counter rotation, whereas things like lateral dekes require more block rotation. Back to the cue here. The purpose of this cue is not to work on the arm swing. It's an exaggeration. The purpose is to allow the hips to relax and move freely with the upper body. If the hips are relaxed, they'll naturally follow the upper body's lead. Then ideally you take that feeling of being super relaxed and bring it into your corkscrew. While doing this cue, I was trying to look for any bracing points or areas of tension in the hips, finding them and then eliminating them. As for my execution on the cue, I give myself a 5 out of 10, an average score. My hips were definitely moving with my upper body, and I'm even in a very similar position as Mackinnon here. That said, I think I could have done a better job focusing on areas of tension and trying to eliminate them, and I think I could use a little more work on this cue. If you're looking to relax your hips and implement this cue, you could do it with both hands on your stick like I did, you could do it with one hand, or you could even do it without a stick. I just felt it was easier to feel out the movement when I had both hands on my stick, but of course you have to do whatever feels best for you. My overall progress rating on the corkscrew after these cues is a 6 out of 10. Really high, but I can't help but feel that my physical limitations are holding me back. So right now I'm making it a priority to make sure my body is in optimal condition to perform these mechanics as they should be. Let's move on to the reverse 10 and 2. As a reminder, last episode I felt something was off with my back foot on the exit, but the cue that helped was more related to my front foot. The cue was rather than adjust my Y angle to spray snow, to try to maintain the same level of Y angle by shaving the ice at the toe of my skate. If you don't know what Y angle means, don't sweat it. I got a quick explanation on the top of your screen. Here's the same clip from last week, and we see that when I'm sliding with my front foot, I'm shaving the ice at the mid blade and initiating the slide by reducing my Y angle, so my boot is fully upright. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but the problem that I was having was that I was never gripping or getting any weight on my front foot. So that means I immediately had to transfer my weight to my back foot, which threw me off. So in this updated clip, I was able to ride or at least cut the ice with my front foot, so I didn't have to switch right away to my back foot, making the exit way more comfortable. As you may be able to tell, the reverse 10 and 2 has not been one of my main focuses, and I didn't really do a lot of reps on this cue. So this is going to be the last time that we're going to see the reverse 10 and 2 in this series, at least for now. As for my execution and progress, I'd give my execution on this cue a 2 out of 10 and progress a 1 out of 10. Just because, again, I really didn't do many reps. I just threw in a couple reps at the end of my skate, and you can't expect to make progress or even implement a cue with such little reps. That being said, just the knowledge and experimenting with the cue merits at least a 1 out of 10 in progress. If you stay to the end, then you're probably invested in the series, so I want to provide a little update. I still have the punch-in video to come out, but those clips are old, and by the time I'm finished and release that video, they're going to be very old. That said, there's some really valuable information and cues that I definitely want to share, so eventually that video is going to come out. But I want the series to be more up to date, so I'm going to put that video on the back burner and fast forward to what I'm currently working on now, which is the cross-under. The cross-under will be the focus of the series for at least the next month or two, and I'm going to get into why I call it the cross-under versus the crossover in that series as well. That being said, I'm still working on my corkscrew and other mechanics, so there won't only be cross-under content in the series. With that, there will also be a new cross-under compilation coming, so we can analyze how the best in the world do it, and this time it won't only include McDavid. You can expect that to come out within the month. And lastly, I want to try to be more consistent with these videos and get them out to you on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. If you're excited about the Cross-Under series or not, let me know in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, drop a like, and if you haven't already seen last week's episode, you could watch it right here.